CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. Miracles among the ruins. Survivors continue to emerge from the rubble 5 days after huge earthquakes hit Turkey and Syria. The head of the World Health Organization arrives in Aleppo, pledging more aid for Syrian hospitals. A chance to reboot and reset. The leaders of Brazil and the United States vow to protect democracy and the environment as they meet in Washington. Survivors continue to be pulled alive from the rubble 5 days after twin earthquakes devastated parts of southern Turkey and northern Syria. In the Turkish city of Diyarbakir, a woman was rescued after 122 hours trapped underground. In Gaziantep, the centre of the quake, a pregnant woman and her young daughter were also found alive. And in Hatay province, close to the Syrian border, a 10-day-old baby was found, apparently unharmed. The combined death toll in both countries has now passed 25,000, with the focus shifting towards helping the millions of people who've been made homeless amid freezing weather in many areas. Our correspondent Shamin Chowdhury is in the Turkish city of Adana, and she says hopes are fading of finding any more survivors.
It's been 140 hours now, more than that in fact, and certainly the expectations now are that very few people will be found alive. You've cited a couple of examples. There's also the example of a 4-year-old girl and her father who were found alive in Gaziantep, as well as an entire family of 6. But really, these positive stories are few and far between. The shift has very much focused now on the recovery process, that is finding dead bodies. Now, you just gave the death toll there at above 25,000. That is Turkey and Syria combined. The UN is saying that is likely to double. There is no indication at this stage of how many bodies lie underneath the 12,000 or so buildings that have been completely destroyed here in Turkey alone, and that's across 12 cities. Now, we're in Adana. The rescue process has been going on since the beginning of the, since the earthquake happened on Monday. We are being told that there is one body still underneath this mountain of rubble, and they are expecting that person to have died. There are a couple of ambulances on standby, but the robustness with which they are now working on this site is very different to how things were yesterday, when it was a very delicate operation using thermal cameras, hoping to find more bodies. It really is a more robust clear-up process now.
Well, even 5 days after the quake, survivors are still being found under the rubble of homes and buildings in some cities, bolstering hopes among rescue teams and relatives. Evangelos Sipsas reports.
It's been nearly 5 days and rescuers continue to search for signs of life. And amazingly, they're finding some. First, a woman, and now a 34-year-old man are pulled out of this 6-story building. He was buried under concrete and metal bars for over 100 hours. Rescue workers spent hours clearing debris with whatever resources they had, using cranes, shovels, buckets, and even their hands, and whatever else needed to free the man.
A long time had passed when we reached him and pulled him out. But before the young man, we were able to save a woman. That's when we got hope and said, let's continue, so we did. We heard a voice coming from behind. We focused on working on that part of the rubble. We dug 4 floors down and found him, and he came out alive.
More than 8,000 people have been pulled from the debris in Turkey. And according to the Vice President Fuat Oktay, about 380,000 people have been taking refuge in government shelters, hotels, or makeshift tent cities. But the number of those losing their lives is increasing as days go by and temperatures continue to plunge. Search teams and emergency aid from throughout the world poured into Turkey and Syria as rescue workers dug through the rubble in a desperate search for survivors. Most of them spend days without sleep in the hope of recovering anyone they can.
We have been working here since the beginning and are only taking a couple of hours of breaks, but even then we have someone listen while we rest. Many of the times when we fall asleep a bit, we are woken up by a noise and continue to dig.
In the affected areas, the rescue workers are overwhelmed, both physically and mentally. A lot of them come from the countries that send aid and rescue teams, and others are simply volunteers working side by side in the hope of finding any sign of life. But as the days go by and the temperatures drop below zero, the chances of finding those signs are fading. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN from Gaziantep province, Turkey.
The head of the World Health Organization has arrived in northern Syria. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus is visiting hospitals and shelters in the war-torn city of Aleppo and has pledged more help for the region. The WHO is warning that the death toll in Syria is likely to rise during the recovery phase, with fears over possible water contamination and disease outbreak due to infrastructure damage. UK charities have launched a fundraising appeal following the earthquakes. The British government has said it's already sent humanitarian aid to the quake zones, including thermal blankets and a field hospital. Meanwhile, Turkish communities here in London have been collecting donated goods to send to survivors. Our correspondent Kitty Logan reports.
It's frantic work, driven by the desperate situation evolving since the earthquakes struck. Volunteers at this Turkish community centre are sorting donated goods, sending them to the hundreds of thousands left without shelter.
It's mainly clothes, baby food, baby nappies, blankets, jumpers, shoes, socks, because obviously over there it's very cold.
Turkish Airlines has laid on charter flights to take this aid where it's most needed.
So hopefully get all these stuff we've got here straight to Turkey as soon as possible we can, because there's kids out there that haven't got no clothes left, there's families that haven't got their jackets, nothing. It's snowing right now.
The group is coordinating with the Turkish Red Crescent, ensuring these items end up in the right hands.
This fantastic community-led effort is being replicated all across London and around the country. But the next challenge will be distributing this to the people who desperately need it on the ground.
Among the British charities trying to get help to those who need it is Human Appeal. Now Syrians are suffering a second tragedy since the civil war. They desperately need emergency supplies.
Today we reached 800 food kit distribution, and then we will continue tomorrow with hot meals, hopefully, and then that would be continued with the hygiene kit.
British teams are also helping rescue efforts in Turkey, using specialist equipment to search for survivors.
So far we've rescued dozens of people, but there's still lots more trapped, people we can hear screaming beneath the rubble. But we're going to do our best. We're still working hard round the clock to rescue as many people as we can.
With so many left with nothing, in dire conditions, the UK Disasters Emergency Committee is fundraising for 15 British charities, helping provide shelter, medicines, food and clean water.
We need people to give generously, because as important as the short-term needs are now, we know that we're also going to have long-term needs of people who have lifelong injuries, who have significant psychological issues, who may not be able to return to their livelihood.
And the cost of living crisis hasn't yet discouraged public generosity. The community centre so crammed, it's since stopped accepting donated goods. The focus now on fundraising for a long, difficult recovery phase. Kitty Logan, CGTN, London.
Still ahead here on CGTN, the leaders of the US and Brazil vow to defend democracy and fight deforestation as they meet at the White House.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Miracles among the ruins. Survivors continue to emerge from the rubble 5 days after huge earthquakes hit Turkey and Syria. And the head of the World Health Organization arrives in Aleppo, pledging more aid for Syrian hospitals. The presidents of Brazil and the United States have given a strong show of unity in Washington. Lula da Silva met Joe Biden at the White House for wide-ranging talks that covered democracy, deforestation and the divisions that they say were caused by their predecessors. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports.
It's just the first meeting between President Lula da Silva of Brazil and his US counterpart Joe Biden. But already these two men are bound together by something profound, immediate and arguably troubling, as the leaders of the two biggest democracies in the Americas, Lula and Biden, have already weathered attempts to stop them becoming presidents, to stop them taking office, by supporters of their right-wing predecessors. Most recently last month in Brazil, where supporters of Lula's predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, stormed key institutions in the Brazilian capital, Brasilia, to try to stop Lula from taking office. And that was almost 2 years to the very day that supporters of former US President Donald Trump stormed Congress here in Washington, D.C., to try to stop lawmakers certifying Joe Biden as president. So there's plenty for those two men to pool their experiences, to draw from those experiences and those events as they prepare for a democracy summit in next month in March. There are plenty of other issues on the agenda as well, though, notably the Amazon. Lula is committed to try to reverse massive deforestation of the Amazon. And there's talk that the US will get on board with a special Amazon fund with Germany and Norway to try to contribute financially to that. The question mark here is how much and how quickly the US is ready to commit to that. The trade ties between these two countries aren't profound. Brazil and the US exchange a fraction of the goods that, for example, the US trades with Canada and Mexico. But they do want to expand those bilateral trade ties. And yet there are points of divergence as well. Lula has always been committed to supporting the leadership of countries like Venezuela and Cuba. That's politically difficult for Joe Biden and the Biden administration to do. So that is a point of divergence. There's also the awkward optic of the aforementioned Bolsonaro, who's now here in the United States. He left for Florida before Lula was inaugurated and is now living just a couple of hours' drive from his political ally Donald Trump in Florida. And that's awkward for Joe Biden. Bolsonaro is reportedly wanting to extend his stay for 6 months. Some of Biden's own Democrat lawmakers want him to get involved and effectively send Bolsonaro back to Brazil, where he's wanted for questioning in connection with allegations that he helped foment those attempts to stop Lula from taking office. But that would be very awkward for Biden to effectively step into a diplomatic matter. And some of Lula's supporters say it's actually better for Lula that Bolsonaro remains in the US, or at least outside of Brazil. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
The FBI has found another classified document at the home of former US Vice President Mike Pence. Last month, attorneys for Mr. Pence said a small number of classified files from his time in office were found at his home in Indiana. Pence confirmed that the files were removed after he agreed to a thorough and unrestricted search. The United States says it has shot down a high-altitude object off the coast of Alaska. The White House said it doesn't yet know what the object is or where it came from, but that it was around the size of a small car. The Pentagon says it posed a risk to civilian air traffic. Pilots determined it was unmanned before it was destroyed. China is sending veterinary experts to the US to help find out what caused the death of a panda. The 25-year-old male called Lele died at the Memphis Zoo on February the 1st. He was meant to be returned to China in April, along with another panda. The US is gearing up for one of its busiest 24 hours of the year ahead of the Super Bowl on Sunday. Retailers, bars and restaurants are all hoping that customers will continue to spend big while watching the event, despite the rising cost of living. Our correspondent Hendrik Sabrandi reports.
Paula Oweda is in pre-game mode. She's getting ready to open her Colorado doors Sunday and host a Super Bowl party. It's not her first rodeo. She's done this 5 or 6 times before.
It's fun. Why? It's an opportunity to get together and celebrate and have some good food and drinks and hang out with friends. And I actually like watching the commercials a lot, too. This year, we're expecting about 18 to 20 people.
Her grocery shopping is done. She says food...
I'm doing a turkey pumpkin chili.
...is a little more expensive since the last batch she threw.
It's been a couple years since we've hosted a Super Bowl party in particular, but yeah, there's definitely been an increase in the pricing.
Still, it's full steam ahead here.
I think people are going to do exactly what the National Retail Federation thinks they're going to do, is spend a lot of money on Super Bowl.
Economist Stephen Weiler points to the Trade Association's latest survey, which predicts fans will shell out $16.5 billion this year for the game, an average of $85 per household, the second highest total ever. Food and beverages are expected to make up 79% of Super Bowl purchases, far more than spending on team apparel, decorations, and TVs. After its slowest month of the year, January, Argonaut Wine and Liquor in Denver expects to do brisk business leading up to the game as customers push the envelope with their libations.
You make the margarita and then you pour the beer upside down in it, and this little device holds the beer upside down in it, so you're getting margarita and beer mixed together. Have you had them?
Throughout the year, we try to eat healthy and stuff like that, but as far as like Super Bowl goes, everything goes.
But the man in charge here says times have changed.
I think it's getting hard for people.
Josh Robinson thinks inflation curbed a consumer trend towards purchasing more premium liquor.
It doesn't help when grocery items are skyrocketing every time you go into the grocery store. So we're just doing our best to keep our prices where they're at and help folks out.
Weiler says while people are spending less and saving more lately,
humans need shelter, and they need heat, and they need food. Those tend to be the last things that people give up.
Especially, he says, on this quasi-national holiday. A Wells Fargo report does show the prices of chicken wings and guacamole, Super Bowl party staples, are down.
The one thing that has gotten more expensive is beer. Maybe it's going to be a BYOB party.
Oweda says her party will be a success if it's a good game, there are no leftovers, and her guests leave with a smile.
Hopefully it's not too big of a mess, but I'll try to commission my kids to help clean up.
Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Denver.
Increasing tourism from China is a priority for Europe, according to one European lawmaker. Istvan Weihei has told CGTN that Chinese tourism is vital, not only economically, but also for building better relations. He's been speaking to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels.
Welcome, Istvan Weihei. You're a Hungarian member of the European Parliament. You also have a very important role in tourism in the European Parliament. Can you talk a little bit about what that role entails for you?
For me, the tourism industry is part of my life. In the past, I was president of the Hungarian National Tourist Board. I was state secretary to serve the tourism industry. And you have to know that in the European Union, we have 25 million jobs in the tourism industry. So for all the member states, also for my country, is very important. And here in the House, I'm responsible for the tourism industry.
And looking at those millions of jobs and looking at the reopening in China, which is obviously what we're talking about today, how do you think that reopening will impact the European tourist industry, and how will those tourists coming back impact the European tourism industry?
When we are talking about the EU-Chinese tourism relations, we have to realize that how important it is for the European industry. The tourism industry is the third biggest industry in the European Union, and before the pandemic we had step by step we had more and more Chinese tourist groups or individual travelers, and the last 3 years were very hard for the tourism industry. That's why it's a huge step to rebuild this connection.
Having said that, there's an increasingly tense relationship. We've seen the European Commission put out proposals to have more strategic autonomy, to move away from dependence on China on things like rare earth. Do you think that strategic autonomy, that distance, growing distance, there's a dependency for sure, and so that relationship is never going to be cut, but there's a distance. Will that impact tourism, or should tourism kind of be left on its own because that's not as political?
That's why I'm part of the tourism, education and cultural relations, and I don't want to be involved to the trade discussions. Because of course we have lots of political and diplomatic gaps and conflicts this time with China. I'm not happy about it, because in my mind we have to build the bridges, and I don't like these kinds of things which divide us. But the tourism, and it's very important, you have to know that the tourism is the industry of the peace. So always when we have more or less perfect relations with other part of the world, it's useful for the tourism industry. So we need peace and we need better diplomatic relations, but I think the people-to-people dialogue, what I mentioned, education, culture and tourism, will be the best bridge between the two parts of the world.
Something to look forward to. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, let's return to our top story now and get the latest on the situation in Turkey following the earthquakes there. And we're joined by Trent Murray, our correspondent. He's in the Turkish city of Malatya. Good to see you there, Trent. So what are the emergency teams doing there where you are?
Well, Paul, I mean, 135 hours now or more since these earthquakes hit. I can't believe what I'm about to tell you, but behind me, they believe they may have found 2 more survivors, and they're trying to reach them. Now, this is an apartment block which collapsed in the quake on Monday. Up there right now is not just a Turkish search and rescue crew, but also a crew from Sichuan province in China, from Blue Sky Rescue. I met one of the volunteers earlier called Lin Shui. They are working up there with the help of translators on both sides, the 2 teams trying to reach the people. We understand it's a woman and her adult daughter. We don't know their condition, but what I can tell you is that the woman's husband is here. We imagine right now he's praying for a miracle that they'll be able to be pulled from that rubble. I'll just get you to pop out of my live shot there, brother. But yeah, right now, trying to reach them is extraordinary. Sniffer dogs are here, and they're trying to make contact with them. A very delicate situation, but they're going to try and reach them, I think, in the next hour or so.
Just extraordinary, Trent. We can but hope that there will be another miracle, and this woman and her daughter have survived after all of these days. What are people there saying about how this has been handled?
Well, one of the main the discussion points right now that we're hearing is this question over building safety. Many people will come up to me and our team and say, look, buildings like this shouldn't just collapse the way they do. And there are now questions and investigations taking place over a number of building firms. We actually heard that one big property developer was caught trying to flee the country last night at Istanbul airport. He was arrested on his way to Montenegro. Several other arrests have been made as well over allegations that corners were cut during construction or renovation work. So a lot of focus on that, but also the humanitarian response and how we're going to house all of these millions of people. Many of them are in tents right now. They're hoping they'll be able to get something a little bit more permanent after this immediate emergency and stage of the crisis is over.
Trent Murray in the Turkish city of Malatya. There, extraordinary scenes as rescuers try to look for survivors. Thank you very much indeed. Now, a long-standing landmark in Beijing is set to reopen next month after a high-tech makeover. The Workers' Stadium was built in 1959 and has hosted major sporting events, including matches involving the Chinese capital's football team, Beijing Guoan. Our correspondent Ning Hong has this report.
To many growing up in China's capital, the Beijing Workers' Stadium provides a window to the world. Now, 60 years later, the newly renovated stadium is ready to host major sporting events like the World Cup.
In terms of technical standards, Beijing Workers' Stadium can host the final of the Club World Cup and the semi-final of the World Cup. Whether it is the design of the stand and the private rooms or the audience service facilities, it is on par with the home stadium of the world's top clubs.
The walls of the stadium use bare concrete molded into a seemingly simple shape, reflecting a high standard of engineering. The stands are bowl-shaped and designed to accommodate about 68,000 spectators.
The lawn under our feet is 2.7 meters thick. There is drainage, heating, ventilation underground. After turning on the heating, the temperature of the grass can reach 10 degrees Celsius. Lawns are very expensive.
The stadium is covered by a super cloud network, allowing visitors to use their mobile phones to access VR and AR content.
So all the business entities, when they join Gongti to serve others, and when we have 40 million visitors per year, they will have the strongest digital capacity here. So with this strongest digital capability, they can enjoy a metaverse service which they will never experience in any other place. That's why we call it, this is the world first metaverse to be built upon a real project.
The project will go online in 2023 when the stadium will be ready to stun the world once again. Ning Hong, CGTN, Beijing.
And the headlines again. Miracles among the ruins. Survivors continue to emerge from the rubble 5 days after huge earthquakes hit Turkey and Syria. The head of the World Health Organization arrives in Aleppo, pledging more aid for Syrian hospitals. And a chance to reboot and reset. The leaders of Brazil and the United States vow to protect democracy and the environment as they meet in Washington. And that is The World Today. Thanks for watching. There's more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, from all the team in London, goodbye.